So, whatever happened to the 1976 classic sci-fi Logan's Run? Let's find out. Movies,
music, and monsters.
Hey guys, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Logan's Run. Wow, what an amazing movie concept and sci-fi classic. Most people at the time thought that Logan's Run was nothing more than a cheap Star Wars ripoff, but Logan's Run came first. The film, Logan's Run, was directed by Michael Anderson and had an unbelievable cast including Michael York, Richard Jordan, Jenny Agutter, Farrah Fawcett, and even world-renowned British actor Peter Ustinov.
I felt very lucky when I first went out to Los Angeles because this film Logan's Run came up. I was screen tested. I was in Hollywood for the first time. I was going up for a major MGM movie with Peter Ustinov and Michael York, and I got that role. I had the greatest fun making it.
Believe it or not, the story was actually pretty simple. In the dystopian future year of 2274, there's no poverty, no war, no money, just love, peace, and tranquility. Except for the fact that you have to die when you're 30. The film definitely seems to follow all the typical 1970s futuristic apocalyptic themes like the Omega Man, like Soylent Green, where utopian societies masquerade as some weird dystopia. Man, I'm telling you, the 70s sci-fi did not look too bright until Star Wars came along. Not that Star Wars looked all that bright, but it definitely did give us a new hope. Anyway, getting back to Logan's Run. This film was generally adapted from the 1967 book of the same name by author William F. Nolan. However, the film really only stayed true to the book's two main concepts. One, having to die at a certain age, which was 21 in the book, not 30, and two, Logan running away with Jessica and being chased by Francis. The movie also introduced the idea of carousel for eliminating the 30-year-olds, although in the book you were simply given a lethal yet enjoyable injection of death serum. Now, MGM did attempt several times to adapt this book into a film, but those all led into what Hollywood commonly refers to as development hell. Kind of interesting that only after Soylent Green and Westworld came out in 1973 that MGM felt that Logan's Run might just work well as a motion picture. So without those two, you wouldn't have gotten this one. The first producer to attempt to get this book made was none other than George Pal in 1969. Oh, we've talked about Mr. George Pal many times. Pretty amazing guy. When Worlds Collide, War of the Worlds, and of course, The Time Machine. I've done videos on those last two. Check them out. Link in the description. Anyway, George Pal had real issues trying to get this going because the vision of the movie he wanted was radically different than what the screenwriter wanted. And believe it or not, he was looking to get legendary actor Robert Redford to play the lead. How cool would that have been? But that never happened, so George Pal left the project. Next, in 1974, a producer named Saul David took over, with Stanley Greenberg assigned to write the screenplay. Stanley Greenberg was the guy who wrote Soylent Green. Video on that coming soon, stay tuned. It was actually Stanley Greenberg who came up with the whole idea of carousel, but then he was suddenly dropped from the project. Man, development hell is right. So they brought in a new screenwriter named David Goodman, who came up with a completely new screenplay, also raising the age of death from 21 to 30. And why did they raise the age? Well, that would allow more actors to be considered for casting. Now, Michael Anderson, the director, was known for his film Around the World in 80 Days, which won the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture in 1957. Then, in September 1975, just prior to filming, it was announced that Peter Ustinov would play the last man alive in Washington. He was quite a well-known actor at the time, and that was considered a really big deal.
He suddenly came and suggested I should play the 100-year-old man in Logan's Run, which was a surprise for me. I was the only resident in the ruins of the Congress with thousands and thousands of cats.
Michael York was just fantastic in the role of Logan. He was always one of my favorite actors from the 1970s, especially in The Island of Dr. Moreau. Video on that coming soon. Farrah Fawcett had a small role. Okay, be honest. How many of you had that poster on the wall? Come on, admit it. It's really kind of interesting how she got the part. Michael York, the guy playing Logan, was out one day playing tennis, and he saw what he described as a blonde vision of delight. Kind of a weird way to describe someone, but okay. So he suggested her to the casting director, and she got the role of Holly. I guess it really pays off in Hollywood to be a blonde vision of delight. L.B. Abbott and Glenn Robinson were in charge of special effects and found that the effects of creating Carousel was going to be extremely difficult. The entire carousel sequence was one of the most complex flying wire stunts ever done for a movie up to that time. They constructed this big circular rig above the set designed to rotate and sync with the revolving floor below. And apparently all the wires got caught during rehearsal, and all the stuntmen would have to be untangled and brought down from the rig until they eventually found a way to redesign it and make it safer. Then in post-production, they added this fog screen layer to it to help hide the wires. But if you look real close, you can occasionally see them. No big deal. The whole carousel thing was not only weird, but slightly off-putting to watch. But I guess that was the whole point. Kinda cool, they actually created new hologram special effects just for this film. It's always interesting to me how filmmakers have a unique vision and literally come up with new technologies just to bring that to the screen. Really cool. The ice cave sequence was actually filmed in Los Angeles in the middle of summer. The actors frozen in the ice were basically just extras who were painted white. Their job? Stand very still and act frozen. Now, as you guys know, I am a robot guy, but box, I was never quite sure what I thought of that weird psychopathic robot. Kinda silly, kinda creepy. I guess it was because it always seemed overly obvious that it was an actor in a robot costume with tinfoil wrapped around his face, which is pretty much exactly what it was. There were so many cool and awesome robots and robot designs throughout the course of the 60s and 70s, but this one just didn't do it for me personally. Or maybe it was because he was freezing people simply to be eaten later. Perhaps they were Soylent Green. Those really cool pistols that they had were apparently really difficult to use. They shot out really quick bursts of butane gas, and that's what gave it that cool look. And according to most of the cast who worked on the film, the guns rarely worked.
You can see that both Richard and I, as Sandman, had these guns that shoot these kind of blasts of energy. They were absolute pain. These guns they worked on kind of gas cylinders, but a lot of the time they didn't work. So there was a lot of kind of wasted film and so on. But when they do work, they look spectacular.
One thing I do have to touch on, however, about the Sandmen, they were terrible shots. Shoot, miss. Shoot, miss. Shoot, miss. For God's sakes, they could have been stormtroopers. Kind of cool, this was the first movie ever to use Dolby Stereo on 70mm prints of the film. That is, if you were actually lucky enough to be in a theater showing a 70mm projection of the film. 9 entire sound stages were used at MGM to make this film. 9. That's a lot. One of the sound stages contained that enormous miniature city, which was the largest miniature set ever produced up to that time. Now, like most films, there were certain scenes in the script that they filmed that just never made the final cut. One of them being a political joke about Richard Nixon, and the other being a scene where Box the Robot asks Logan and Jessica to pose for an ice sculpture. Kinda weird. That scene was apparently cut because it just showed way too much of Jessica. Damn, this is kind of interesting from a movie-making perspective. One of the reasons that the film had a very distinguishable look was the fact that the director used a lot of wide-angle lenses. Back then, these lenses weren't generally available, but it certainly gave the film a very unique look, which I think still sets it apart from other films from the time. Of course, the producers are always attempting to find ways to save money, so they did a lot of filming at existing locations in Dallas. Tons of shots in the film were filmed at the Apparel Mart in Dallas Market Center, and the Sandman headquarters was filmed at Pegasus Park. They also filmed in Texas at the Fort Worth Water Gardens. Again, all these places are still there and pretty much look the same today as they did back then. Many of the outdoor scenes that were filmed after the escape in the woods were filmed at Malibu Creek Park, home to not only MASH, but also Planet of the Apes. Kinda cool. Now, post-production on this film took about 8 full months to complete. The iconic score was composed and conducted by legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith. Other than maybe John Williams, probably one of the biggest composers in modern cinematic history. Planet of the Apes, Patton, The Omen, Star Trek the Motion Picture, Poltergeist, Alien, First Blood, and so many others. We could be here all day. To me, the score had a real Forbidden Planet kind of sound to it. Very mechanical, very electronic, very cool. You know, for the life of me, I cannot figure out how this film got a PG rating. I mean, not only the costumes, oh man, the costumes, but the whole scene with the love shack or whatever that thing is. Not that I'm complaining, but wow. I mean, being able to order a lover at the push of a button. But then again, today, I guess we just have an app for that. The budget for Logan's Run escalated from a projected $3 million to just over $9 million. That is super expensive for a film back in 1976. In fact, it's remembered by the financial analysts for being the most expensive MGM film made within that 10-year period. Kind of strange, at the end of the movie, one of the extras makes the Star Trek Vulcan hand salute. Why? Don't know. Lines are open, you decide. Logan's Run was released to theaters in 1976 and grossed over $2.5 million within its first 5 days. It finished its initial run, bringing in more than $25 million in North America. That, my friends, is not too shabby for 1976. Critically, the film received generally mixed responses. Roger Ebert gave the film a 3-star rating, calling it a vast and silly extravaganza. The New York Times reviewer apparently couldn't follow the storyline and complained about the screenplay. God, critics. But the fans loved it, and still do. It has one of the most loyal followings in the classic sci-fi genre to this day. Logan's Run was nominated for 3 Academy Awards in 1977 and 1 for Best Special Achievement. It was also nominated for 6 Saturn Awards, including Best Science Fiction Film, Best Cinematography, Best Art and Set Direction, Best Costumes, and Best Makeup. And it won for every single one of them. There was also a Marvel Comics series based on the film in 1977. It only lasted 7 issues, but was quite popular at the time. And don't forget about the possible remakes and reimaginings. Over the years, many different directors have stated that they wanted to make a film adaptation that was much closer to the novel itself, which would be awesome. On the other hand, within the past 5 years, ideas have floated around Hollywood for a new adaptation with, of course, a female lead. Whatever. But wait, what about the TV series? The theatrical release of Logan's Run was so successful that MGM offered William Nolan, the author of the original story, over $9 million to create a television series based on the film. But that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you enjoyed that retrospective on Logan's Run, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole lot of videos coming up that I know you guys are just going to dig. As always, if anybody has any questions, drop them down in the comments below and I will do my best to try to answer them for you. And please, feel free to stop back anytime as we continue our conversation on movies, music, and monsters. Movies,
music, and monsters.